I've been teaching seventh grade mathematics for 23 years. And in that time, I've learned to read the invisible equations that govern children's lives. Some students arrive with confidence multiplied by support. Others carry the weight of division split loyalties, fractured homes, diminished expectations. But I'd never encountered anything quite like the arithmetic of the Race family until Adeline and Callista walked into my classroom that September morning. They were identical twins, or so I thought at first glance. Same honey-colored hair, same green eyes, same angular jawline that would serve them well in adolescence. But as the weeks passed, I began to notice the subtle differences not in their features, but in how they inhabited space. Callista entered every room like she was stepping onto a stage, shoulders back, smile ready, eyes scanning for her audience. She chose the desk in the second row, center position, where she could see and be seen by everyone. Her notebooks were color coordinated, her handwriting pristine, her hand the first to shoot up when I asked questions she knew the answers to. Adeline slipped in quietly, claiming a seat by the window in the back corner. Her notebooks were practical, stuffed with loose papers and football schedules. She did her homework in pencil, erasing so often that holes wore through the paper. When she raised her hand, which was rare, it was tentative, as if she was asking permission to exist. The first parent-teacher conference in October painted the picture in stark relief. Callista is such a joy, Mrs. Race beamed, settling into the plastic chair across from my desk. Honor roll again, of course, and she just got the lead in the school play. Mr. Race nodded, scrolling through his phone with one eye on our conversation. She's always been special. Natural performer. I waited for them to mention Adeline, whose test scores were actually higher than her sister's, whose problem-solving approach showed genuine mathematical intuition. When they didn't, I prompted gently. And how do you feel Adeline is adjusting to seventh grade? Mrs. Race's smile flickered. Oh, she's fine. You know how it is with twins. One's always more outgoing than the other. Adeline's our little athlete. Not much for academics, but she tries hard. I glanced at my grade book, where Adeline's scores contradicted this narrative entirely. Actually, she's performing quite well in mathematics. Her approach to word problems is particularly, that's nice. Mr. Race interrupted, finally looking up from his phone. We just want to make sure she's not giving you any trouble. She can be intense sometimes. The word hung in the air like a mathematical proof I couldn't quite solve. Intense. I thought of Adeline in my classroom, quiet, focused, helpful to struggling classmates, never once disruptive. What equation had led them to this conclusion after they left? I sat in my empty classroom and opened both girls' portfolios. Callista's work was neat, correct, but formulaic. She followed procedures without innovation. Adeline's papers told a different story. She found shortcuts, drew diagrams that revealed deeper understanding, asked questions in the margins that pushed beyond the assignment. Yet somehow, in the mathematics of their family, Adeline equaled trouble while Callista equaled treasure. I should have said something then, should have questioned their assessment, shared my observations, advocated for the student who clearly needed an advocate. Instead, I filed the portfolios away and moved on to the next parent conference. It was the first of many calculations I would get wrong. The November morning when the twins turned 13, Callista bounced into first period wearing a tiara and a sash that read Birthday Girl. Several classmates had already wished her happy birthday, and she was graciously accepting their attention like a royal receiving subjects. Adeline arrived 3 minutes later. No fanfare, no acknowledgement from anyone that she shared this milestone. She took her usual seat and pulled out her homework. but I noticed she kept glancing at her sister's celebration with something that looked like bewilderment. During lunch, I found myself walking past the Race family setup on the back patio, visible through the chain link fence that separated school property from the residential neighborhood. They lived just 2 blocks away, and their backyard abutted our campus. What I saw made my stomach clench with a familiar dread, the same feeling I got when a student turned in a test with all the right answers, but had clearly been coached through every problem. The party was elaborate pink streamers, matching tablecloths, a tower of presents wrapped in coordinating paper, and in the center of it all, a 3-layer cake with Happy Birthday, Callista, written in flowing script. Just Callista. I watched Adeline sitting alone on a porch swing, picking at a corner piece of sheet cake while her sister posed for photos with the magnificent centerpiece. The geometry of exclusion couldn't have been clearer if someone had drawn it on my whiteboard. I told myself it was a mistake. Maybe they had separate cakes, separate celebrations. Maybe Adeline had requested something different. Maybe I was seeing patterns where none existed. But I kept watching, and the mathematics never balanced. When the family gathered to sing Happy Birthday, only one name filled the song. When presents were opened, only one child received them. When photos were taken, Adeline was either cropped out or relegated to the background, a shadow in her own birthday story. The most telling moment came when Mr. Race walked past his daughter on the swing without acknowledging her. Adeline looked up hopefully, said something I couldn't hear from my distance, and received only a dismissive wave in return. I should have walked away then, should have minded my own business, graded papers, prepared for afternoon classes. Instead, I found myself noting the time, the weather, the exact configuration of exclusion I was witnessing. I was creating evidence, though I didn't yet know for what. 3 weeks later, Adeline won the district-wide mathematics competition. It wasn't even close. While other 7th graders struggled with basic algebraic concepts, she sailed through problems that wouldn't be formally taught until high school. Her solution to the final bonus question, a complex word problem involving ratios and percentages, was so elegant that the judges asked her to explain her reasoning to the other participants. "I just pictured it like a recipe," she said, standing nervously at the podium while 43 other students looked on. "If you're making cake for different numbers of people, you have to adjust all the ingredients proportionally. It's the same principle." The cake reference made me smile, given what I'd witnessed at her birthday party. Here was a child who understood mathematical relationships intuitively, who could scale concepts up and down with remarkable fluency. When they announced her first place finish, I felt a surge of pride that surprised me with its intensity. I taught thousands of students, watched hundreds of them succeed, but something about Adeline's quiet triumph moved me differently. I called her parents that evening to share the news. That's, that's wonderful," Mrs. Race said, though her tone suggested she was discussing the weather rather than her daughter's academic achievement. She's always been good with numbers. Good with numbers felt like calling Shakespeare decent with words. I pressed a little harder. The judges were quite impressed. They mentioned that her problem-solving approach shows real mathematical maturity. Has she expressed interest in advanced mathematics courses? "Well, we don't want to push her too hard," Mrs. Race replied. "Callista's more naturally academic, honor roll every semester. You know, we worry that if Adeline tries to keep up with her sister, she might get frustrated." I stared at my phone, processing this logic. Adeline had just outperformed students from 12 different schools, including Callista, who hadn't even qualified for the district competition. Yet somehow, in her parents' minds, Callista remained the academic one. "Perhaps we could discuss some enrichment opportunities." "I appreciate your enthusiasm," Mrs. Chen, but we know our daughters. Adeline's strengths lie elsewhere. Sports, maybe. Physical activities. She's always been more aggressive that way. There was that word again. Aggressive. I thought of Adeline in my classroom, patient with struggling classmates, quietly helpful, never demanding attention. What version of this child were her parents seeing the next day? I made sure to announce Adeline's victory to all my classes. Students applauded, asked questions about the competition, seemed genuinely impressed by their classmates' achievement. For exactly 47 minutes, Adeline glowed with well-deserved recognition. Then Callista's mother arrived during my planning period, asking to speak privately. I'm concerned about all this attention Adeline is getting, Mrs. Race said, perching on the edge of a student desk. It's not like her, and I worry it might go to her head. She's been acting different at home, more defiant, more argumentative. I framed my response carefully. I've noticed no behavioral changes in my classroom. If anything, she seems more confident, which I'd consider positive. Confidence can become arrogance quickly with some children, Mrs. Race said, and Adeline has always had trouble with boundaries. I'd appreciate it if you could tone down the praise a bit for her own good. I wanted to ask what boundaries Adeline had supposedly crossed, what defiance had manifested, what evidence supported these concerns. Instead, I nodded and made non-committal sounds until Mrs. Race left, apparently satisfied that she'd contained whatever threat her daughter's success posed to the family equilibrium. That afternoon, I watched Adeline pack up her things with the same quiet efficiency she'd shown all semester. No attitude, no arrogance, no sign of the behavioral problems her mother had described. The disconnect was becoming a chasm, and I was starting to understand that I was the only one with a clear view into it. The first accident happened on a Tuesday in January. Callista arrived at school with a bandaged finger and a story about her sister rushing past her in the bathroom that morning, causing her to scrape against the door frame. She told it with perfect victim energy, hurt but forgiving, brave but vulnerable. It's not her fault, Callista explained to the cluster of friends who gathered around her desk. Adeline's been really stressed lately. Soccer tryouts and everything. She just doesn't pay attention sometimes. And I watched this performance from my desk, noting the careful phrasing, the preemptive forgiveness that made questioning the story seem churlish. Who would doubt such a gracious victim? But I remembered the timeline from the math competition aftermath. The way attention for Adeline had been systematically redirected back to family concerns about her behavior. Now, here was a physical manifestation of those concerns, visible proof that Adeline was, indeed, careless with others' well-being. The second incident came 3 weeks later. Callista showed up with a bruised shoulder, explaining that her sister had bumped into her while rushing to get ready for school. Again, the explanation was delivered with sad understanding rather than anger. I tried to tell her to slow down, Callista said to her increasingly sympathetic audience. But you know how competitive athletes can be. Sometimes they forget not everyone moves at their speed. The genius of it, I was beginning to realize, was in the reasonableness of each explanation. Teenagers were notoriously careless. Athletes could be single-minded. Sisters argued and jostled and occasionally hurt each other accidentally. Any one incident was easily dismissed. But I was keeping track, creating a pattern recognition algorithm in my mind. Injury frequency, timing relative to Adeline's successes, the consistent narrative of Adeline as perpetrator and Callista as gracious victim. The third accident sealed my suspicions. I was grading papers after school when I heard voices in the hallway outside my classroom. Through the small window in my door, I could see Callista standing near the water fountain, talking animatedly on her phone. No, it has to look realistic, she was saying. Not too obvious, but enough that people notice. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Callista's responses were illuminating. She won that stupid writing contest, and now everyone thinks she's so special. I need something that'll get their attention back where it belongs. My blood chilled as understanding dawned. I was witnessing the planning stage of another accident. I should have intervened immediately, should have opened my door, confronted her, demanded an explanation. Instead, I stood frozen behind my desk, paralyzed by the magnitude of what I was discovering. When Callista finished her call and walked away, I remained in my classroom for another hour, staring at my lesson plans without seeing them. By the time I gathered the courage to act, it was too late. The next morning, Callista arrived with a scratch on her arm and a story about Adeline grabbing her during an argument. The wound was fresh, perfectly positioned for maximum visibility, accompanied by the now familiar narrative of accidental harm and generous forgiveness. I knew the truth. I had heard her plan it, and I said nothing. By March, Callista's accidents had become a regular topic of conversation among the faculty. During our monthly meeting, Principal Henderson brought up what he called a concerning pattern of sibling conflict. We've had multiple reports of aggressive behavior between the race twins, he said, consulting his notes. Several teachers have noticed increasing tension, and there have been physical altercations. Mrs. Rodriguez from English raised her hand. I've seen some of this in my classroom. Adeline seems increasingly on edge, and there have been moments where she's been forceful with her sister. I felt my throat tighten. Forceful in what way? Sharp words. Aggressive body language. Yesterday, she grabbed Callista's arm when Callista tried to borrow her pencil. Callista ended up with red marks. The PE teacher nodded grimly. I've noticed it too. Adeline's always been competitive, but lately, it's like she can't control herself around her sister. What about Callista's behavior? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Have you observed anything concerning from her? The question seemed to surprise them. Principal Henderson frowned at his notes. Callista has been nothing but patient with her sisters. Episodes. If anything, she's been too forgiving. The girl came to my office in tears last week, worried about Adeline's escalating behavior. She didn't want to get her sister in trouble, Mrs. Rodriguez added. Said she was hoping the phase would pass. Such a mature attitude for a 13-year-old. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell them exactly what I'd overheard, what I'd witnessed, what I knew to be true. Instead, I sat silent while my colleagues constructed a narrative that painted Adeline as an increasingly violent aggressor and Callista as a saint-like victim. We need to document these incidents more carefully, Principal Henderson continued. If the pattern continues, we may need to consider disciplinary action. What about counseling? I suggested desperately. For both girls, sometimes sibling conflict stems from underlying family dynamics. We've suggested family therapy, he replied. The parents are resistant. They feel the problem is specifically with Adeline's inability to manage her competitive impulses. Of course they did. The family had found their scapegoat, and the school was preparing to make it official. After the meeting, I lingered in the conference room, pretending to organize my materials while the other teachers filed out. When I was alone, I opened my grade book and stared at the twins' performance charts. Adeline's grades had started to slip in February, not dramatically, but enough to notice. She was distracted in class, turning in assignments late, making careless errors that weren't typical for her. The stress of being constantly under suspicion was affecting her academic performance. Meanwhile, Callista's grades remained steady, her behavior exemplary, her reputation as the good twin solidifying with each passing week. I closed the gradebook and made a decision that I would regret for the next 15 years. I would continue to observe and document, but I would not intervene. I told myself I needed more evidence. I told myself one teacher's suspicions wouldn't be enough to overcome the united front of family, administration, and faculty opinion. Really, I was a coward. And that cowardice was about to cost Adeline everything. I witnessed Callista's most masterful performance on a Friday afternoon in early April. The twins were both in my sixth period algebra class, seated on opposite sides of the room as had become standard practice to reduce conflicts. We were working on quadratic equations when I noticed Adeline at the pencil sharpener near my desk. She was taking longer than necessary, and I could see why she was watching her sister with the intensity of someone trying to solve an impossible equation. Callista was hunched over her desk, apparently focused on her work, but from my vantage point at the front of the classroom, I could see what Adeline couldn't. Callista was systematically pressing her mechanical pencil into the skin of her forearm, creating a series of small red marks. The precision was remarkable. Each press was calculated for maximum visual impact without causing real damage. She worked with the focused concentration of an artist, perfecting her masterpiece. When she was satisfied with her work, Callista raised her hand. Mrs. Chen, could I go to the nurse? I'm not feeling well. I looked at her arm, now sporting a collection of fresh marks that would undoubtedly be interpreted as fingernail scratches. Then I looked at Adeline, who was returning to her seat with dawning horror on her face as she noticed her sister's injuries. Did something happen? I asked, though I knew exactly what had happened. Callista glanced at Adeline with perfectly calibrated reluctance. I... I'd rather not say. I just need to see the nurse. Several students had noticed the commotion and were craning their necks to see what was wrong. One gasped audibly when she spotted the marks on Callista's arm. Oh my God, what happened to you? It's nothing, Callista said bravely, gathering her things. Just an accident. But her eyes found Adeline's across the room, and the message was clear. I did this, and everyone will think you did it, and there's nothing you can do to prove otherwise. Adeline's face went white. She started to stand, mouth opening to protest, but Callista was already at the door. I'll write you a pass, I said quickly, desperate to interrupt this performance before it reached its climax. That's okay, Callista replied sweetly. I'll just explain what happened. She left, and the classroom erupted in whispers. Students looked between the empty doorway and Adeline, who had sunk back into her chair like someone processing a devastating diagnosis. Did you see those scratches? One student whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. They looked fresh. No way Callista did that to herself, another replied. She's not that type. I wanted to scream that she was exactly that type, that I had just watched her create those marks with calculated precision. Instead, I stood at the front of my classroom and announced that we needed to return to our equations. But the real equation, the one that would determine Adeline's fate, was already being solved in the nurse's office, the principal's office, and the phone call that would inevitably reach the race parents within the hour. 20 minutes later, my classroom phone rang. Mrs. Chen, could you send Adeline Race to the office? Principal Henderson's voice was grim. We need to speak with her immediately. Adeline looked at me with the expression of someone being called to their execution. She packed her materials slowly, hands shaking slightly, while her classmates watched with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. As she reached the door, she turned back to me with a look that cut straight through my heart. It was a look of desperate hope, as if she thought I might speak up, might tell the truth, might save her from what was coming. I opened my mouth, felt the words forming on my tongue. I saw what really happened. Callista hurt herself. None of this is Adeline's fault. But the words died in my throat, killed by my own cowardice and the certainty that no one would believe me over the mountain of evidence that had been so carefully constructed. Adeline's hope flickered and died. She nodded once, like someone accepting an inevitable verdict, and walked out of my classroom for what I didn't know would be the last time. I spent the rest of the period teaching quadratic equations while my best student was being destroyed by a different kind of mathematics, entirely the cruel calculus of family scapegoating and institutional failure. And I was as much a part of that failure as anyone. The call came at 6:30 the next morning. Mrs. Chen, this is Principal Henderson. I need you to remove Adeline Race's materials from your classroom. She won't be returning to school. I was sitting at my kitchen table, grading the previous day's assignments over coffee. I saw way. Adeline's paper was on top of the stack, a perfect score, as usual, with innovative solutions that showed true mathematical insight. What happened? I asked, though I already knew. Serious incident yesterday afternoon. Physical assault on her sister. We have no choice but to recommend expulsion for the remainder of the semester. My hands started shaking. Are you certain that's what happened? Callista was injured badly enough to require medical attention. The pattern of aggressive behavior has been escalating for months, and we have documentation from multiple teachers about concerning incidents. Documentation. I thought about my own contribution to that file, the careful notes about Adeline's increasing tension, my failure to report what I'd actually witnessed, my cowardly silence while a child was systematically destroyed. What about Adeline's side of the story? She denied it, of course, but the evidence is overwhelming. Callista had defensive wounds on her arms, and there were witnesses who heard the argument that preceded the attack. Witnesses. I wondered if they were the same classmates who had watched Callista perform her self-inflicted injuries in my classroom the day before. How easy it would be to rewrite that timeline, to transform what they'd seen into something that supported the predetermined narrative. I'd like to speak with Adeline before she leaves, I said. I'm afraid that's not possible. Her parents picked her up last night, and frankly, they're concerned about the influence some teachers might have had on her behavior. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Somehow, my support for Adeline's academic achievements had been twisted into evidence of poor influence, of encouraging the very behavior that was now being used to destroy her. Where will she finish the semester? Home tutoring, alternative education. That's between the family and the district. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at Adeline's perfect assignment. The girl who had solved complex equations with elegant simplicity was gone, erased from my classroom as if she had never existed. I drove to school early that morning and cleaned out Adeline's desk. Her supplies were neatly organized, color-coded folders, perfectly sharpened pencils, a small notebook where she'd been working on advanced problems I'd given her for extra credit. In the back of the notebook, I found something that broke my heart, a letter she'd started writing but never finished. Dear Mrs. Chen, I wanted to thank you for believing in me when no one else did. Math class was the only place where I felt like I was good at something important. I know you probably think I'm terrible now, like everyone else does, but I wanted you to know that I never hurt my sister. I would never hurt anyone. Nugget? I don't understand why she's doing this to me, but I hope someday someone will figure out the truth. Thank you for making me feel smart. I'll miss your class. Adeline. I sat in my empty classroom and cried for the first time in my teaching career. But even then, even with this evidence of my students' innocence and pain, I didn't speak up. I told myself it was too late, that the decision had been made, that one teacher's opinion wouldn't change anything. I was wrong about all of it. The blog post appeared on my computer screen on a Tuesday evening in March, 15 years after Adeline Race walked out of my classroom for the last time. I wasn't looking for it. I'd been researching teaching strategies for my graduate course on educational psychology when a link caught my eye. Invisible injuries when families create their own scapegoats. The author's bio was brief. Adeline R. is a freelance journalist and advocate for survivors of family abuse. She writes about the long-term effects of childhood trauma and the process of healing from family rejection. My heart started racing before I even clicked on the article. The post was brilliant, a careful analysis of family scapegoat dynamics, the role of institutional enablers, and the particular cruelty of sibling on sibling psychological abuse. It was written with the same clear thinking and elegant logic I remembered from seventh grade math papers, now applied to the complex equations of human behavior. But it was the story embedded within the analysis that destroyed me. She didn't use real names, but the details were unmistakable. A girl accused of violence she never committed. A twin sister who fabricated evidence with systematic precision. Parents who chose to believe the lies because they confirmed their existing biases. And a school system that failed to protect the very student who needed protection most. The most devastating part, she wrote, wasn't the false accusations or even the expulsion. It was the way every adult who should have advocated for me chose silence instead. There was one teacher, my math teacher, who I believed saw the truth. I caught her watching sometimes, recognition flickering in her eyes. I thought she would speak up, thought she would save me, when she didn't. I learned that being right doesn't matter if no one with power is brave enough to stand with you. I read that paragraph 17 times before I could see through my tears well enough to continue. The blog had thousands of subscribers. Comments poured in from readers sharing similar experiences, siblings who'd been pitted against each other, children who'd been labeled as problems while their siblings could do no wrong, adults still trying to understand why their families had chosen sides against them. But it was the final paragraph that broke me completely. To the adults who stayed silent when they knew better, it's never too late to speak the truth. Sometimes the validation of one person who saw what really happened can change everything for a survivor. We're still here, still waiting to be believed, still hoping someone will finally have the courage to say what happened to you was wrong, and I should have protected you. I printed the blog post and read it 3 more times. Then I opened my laptop and began composing an email I should have written 15 years earlier. Dear Adeline, you probably don't remember me, but I was your 7th grade math teacher at Lincoln Middle School. I read your blog post, and I need you to know I remember everything, and I believe you. I should have spoken up when it mattered. I failed you then, but I'm ready to tell the truth now if it would help. Margaret Chen. I hit send before I could change my mind. The reply came 3 hours later. Mrs. Chen, of course I remember you. You were one of the few bright spots during a very dark time. I would very much like to speak with you. Would you be open to meeting in person? Adeline. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Austin on a Saturday morning. I recognized her immediately, the same green eyes, the same thoughtful expression, but now carried in the face of a confident woman who had clearly built a life on her own terms. Thank you for reaching out, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I have to admit, I'm curious what made you decide to contact me after all these years. I told her about finding her blog, about the guilt I'd carried for 15 years, about the specific moments when I'd known the truth but chosen silence. I described watching Callista self-inflict the injuries in my classroom, overhearing her plan future accidents, witnessing the systematic destruction of Adeline's reputation. She listened without interruption, her expression growing more intent with each revelation. You saw her hurt herself, she asked when I finished. You actually witnessed it, multiple times. I was too much of a coward to report it. Adeline was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with tears. Do you understand what this means to me? She said quietly. For 15 years, I've questioned my own sanity. I knew I never hurt her, but when everyone believes the opposite, you start to doubt your own memory. I'm so sorry I didn't speak up. You're speaking up now, she said. That matters. Over the next 2 hours, I told her everything I remembered. She took notes, asked clarifying questions, helped me reconstruct timelines and identify other potential witnesses. There have to be others who suspected, she said. Teachers, students, family members. People don't usually maintain a lie this elaborate without someone noticing inconsistencies. She was right. As we talked, I remembered conversations with other faculty members, moments of doubt, questions that went unasked, observations that didn't quite fit the official narrative. Would you be willing to help me contact them? Adeline asked. I'm not looking for revenge or legal action. I just want people to know the truth. I thought about all the students I'd taught over the years, all the times I'd preached about the importance of showing your work, proving your answers, standing behind your solutions. Yes, I said, whatever you need. Our investigation began with the Lincoln Middle School yearbook from 2008. Adeline had saved her copy, and we spread it across my dining room table, identifying classmates and teachers who might have witnessed key events. The process felt like reverse engineering a mathematical proof, starting with the conclusion and working backward to find the supporting evidence. I contacted Mrs. Rodriguez first. She was retired now, living in San Antonio with her husband, but she remembered the race twins clearly. I always felt terrible about how that situation played out, she admitted during our phone conversation. There were things that didn't add up, but by the time I started questioning them, the decision had already been made. What kinds of things? I pressed. Callista's essays. For one, she wrote several pieces about forgiveness and dealing with difficult family members. Very mature, very insightful. But when I suggested she might have a future in writing, she seemed completely uninterested, like she was only performing empathy, not actually feeling it. Mrs. Rodriguez agreed to speak with Adeline, and she wasn't the only one. Over the next few weeks, we contacted teachers, coaches, and even some of the twins' former classmates who were now adults with their own perspective on middle school dynamics. The picture that emerged was devastating in its clarity. Coach Williams remembered Adeline's dedication to soccer, her willingness to help younger players, her complete absence of the aggression she was supposedly known for. Quietest kid on the team, he said. If anything, I worried she wasn't assertive enough. Ms. Patterson, the art teacher, recalled a project where students were supposed to draw their families. Callista's drawing showed everyone gathered around her in the center, she said. Adeline drew herself standing apart from the group, but when I asked her about it, she just said that's how it usually was. Even some classmates had retained memories that contradicted the official story. Sarah Martinez, now a nurse in Dallas, remembered being confused by the allegations against Adeline. Man, she was always so careful around other people. Sarah told us during a video call. I remember thinking it was weird that someone that gentle would suddenly become violent. But we were kids. What did we know? The most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Mr. Peterson, the school janitor who had worked at Lincoln for over 30 years. I saw things. He told us when Adeline and I met with him at the diner where he now worked part-time. People don't notice the janitor, so I heard a lot of conversations I probably wasn't supposed to. He described overhearing Callista on the phone several times, planning her next accident. He'd seen her practicing facial expressions in the bathroom mirror, perfecting her victim persona. Most importantly, he'd witnessed the incident that led to Adeline's expulsion. I was cleaning classrooms after school when I heard voices in the hallway, he said. Saw the whole thing through the door window. That girl Callista, she grabbed her own arm and scratched herself up real good. Then she started yelling like her sister had attacked her. Did you report this? Adeline asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. I tried, went to the principal's office the next morning, but they said they already had witness statements and didn't need input from non-academic staff. The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. Said it wasn't my place to get involved in student disciplinary issues. Another adult who had known the truth and been silenced by institutional hierarchy. As our evidence mounted, I felt a mix of vindication and horror. We were proving Adeline's innocence, but we were also documenting a systematic failure of every adult who should have protected her, including myself. The call came on a Thursday evening in May. Mrs. Chen, this is Adeline. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I have a request. Would you be willing to speak with my parents? My stomach clenched. What kind of conversation are you thinking? The kind where the truth gets told, she said simply. They need to hear from someone they can't dismiss as a bitter daughter seeking attention. They need to hear from a teacher who witnessed what really happened. The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday at a neutral location, a small conference room at the local library. Adeline arrived first, looking professional in a navy blazer and carrying a folder of documents. Her parents entered 10 minutes later, and I was struck by how much they'd aged in 15 years. Mrs. Race looked brittle, her hair streaked with premature gray, and her face bearing the lines of someone who had carried stress for years. Mr. Race seemed smaller somehow. His shoulders curved inward as if he'd been carrying an invisible weight. They sat across from us with the wariness of people expecting an ambush. I'm not sure why we're here, Mrs. Race began, her voice tight with defensiveness. If this is some attempt to relitigate ancient history. It's an attempt to tell the truth, I interrupted gently. Something I should have done 15 years ago. For the next hour, I laid out everything I had witnessed. I described the systematic nature of Callista's self-inflicted injuries, the careful timing of each accident, the performance I'd watched in my own classroom. I shared the testimonies from other teachers, the observations from Mr. Peterson, the pattern of evidence that had been available all along to anyone willing to look. Mr. and Mrs. Race listened in stunned silence. I watched their faces cycle through disbelief, anger, confusion, and finally, a dawning horror as the implications became clear. You're saying our daughter, our Callista, deliberately framed her sister. Mrs. Race's voice was barely a whisper. I'm saying the evidence strongly suggests that, yes, I replied. But why didn't you speak up at the time, Mr. Race demanded? If you saw all this, why didn't you tell us? It was the question I'd been dreading and the one I deserved to answer honestly. Because I was a coward, I said simply. Because questioning the narrative felt risky and staying silent felt safe. Because I convinced myself that one teacher's observations wouldn't matter against the weight of everyone else's certainty. I looked directly at Adeline because I failed in my most fundamental duty as an educator to protect my students when they can't protect themselves. The room was quiet for several long minutes. Finally, Mrs. Race spoke, her voice breaking. We destroyed our daughter's life based on lies. We destroyed both our daughters' lives. Mr. Race added quietly. Callista had to live with what she'd done, and we enabled it, rewarded it. Adeline had remained silent through most of the conversation, but now she leaned forward slightly. I need you to understand something, she said to her parents. I'm not here for an apology. I'm not here to be welcomed back into a family that threw me away. I'm here because the truth matters, even when it's 15 years too late. Her voice was steady, controlled, but I could hear the decades of pain beneath it. I built a life without you. I found people who value me, who believe in me, who show up for me consistently. I don't need your validation anymore. Then why are you here? Her mother asked, tears streaming down her face. Because other kids are going through what I went through right now, today. Because families are destroying themselves with these dynamics every day. Because maybe if you understand what really happened, you can help prevent it from happening to someone else. 3 weeks later, Adeline published a follow-up blog post titled, When the Truth Finally Speaks, A Teacher's Confession. She shared my story with permission, describing our investigation and the evidence we'd uncovered. The response was immediate and overwhelming, thousands of comments from readers, shares across social media platforms, and within hours, local news outlets picking up the story. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source, Callista herself. She called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice shaky and uncertain. Mrs. Chen, this is Callista Race. Well, Callista Morrison now. I saw the blog post. I need to talk to someone. We met that afternoon at the same coffee shop where Adeline and I had first reconnected. Callista looked nothing like the confident 13-year-old I remembered. She was thin, hollow-eyed, carrying herself like someone who had been running from something for a very long time. I know what you're thinking, she said before I could speak, that I'm here to deny everything, to keep lying, to protect myself. What are you here for? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her untouched coffee. To tell you that everything Adeline wrote is true, she said finally. Every word of it. The confession poured out of her years of guilt, failed relationships, an inability to maintain friendships because she could never trust herself not to manipulate them. She'd been in therapy for 3 years, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what she'd done to her sister and to herself. I was 13 and jealous and stupid, she said, tears streaming down her face. Adeline was so naturally good at everything, and I felt invisible next to her. When I realized I could make people pay attention to me by making her look bad, it felt like power. What changed? I asked. Why are you coming forward now? Because I have a daughter, she whispered. She's 8 years old, and she's brilliant and kind in everything I destroyed in my sister, and I can't look at her without imagining what it would do to her if someone took away her confidence, her opportunities, her family's love. I can't let Adeline carry this alone anymore. The public confession came 2 days later, a video posted to the same platforms where Adeline's blog had been shared. Callista sat in what appeared to be her living room, speaking directly to the camera with raw honesty about what she had done and why. My name is Callista Morrison, and 15 years ago, I systematically destroyed my twin sister's life with lies, she began. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness or sympathy. I'm here to tell the truth that should have been told when it mattered. She detailed everything: the fake injuries, the manipulated scenarios, the deliberate campaign to paint Adeline as dangerous. She accepted full responsibility and acknowledged the role their parents and the school system had played in enabling her actions. To every adult who suspected something but stayed silent, I understand why you didn't speak up. I was very good at what I did. But I need you to know that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. And to my sister, Adeline, who built a life and a career on truth-telling despite everything I took from her, I'm sorry. I know those words can't give you back your childhood or your family, but they're true, and you deserve to hear them 15 years ago. The video went viral within hours. News outlets picked up the story. Legal experts debated the implications. And suddenly, the race family saga became a national conversation about family scapegoating, institutional failure, and the long term effects of childhood trauma. The media attention was intense but brief, a few weeks of news cycles before the story faded into the background noise of daily events. But the ripple effects continued long after the headlines disappeared. Lincoln Middle School implemented new protocols for investigating allegations of student violence, including mandatory interviews with multiple witnesses and a requirement that administrators seek input from all faculty members who work with the students involved. Principal Henderson, now nearing retirement, issued a public statement acknowledging the school's failure in Adeline's case and announcing a comprehensive review of disciplinary policies. "We failed a student who deserved our protection," he said. "We're committed to ensuring this never happens again." Several other teachers came forward with their own stories of times they'd suspected abuse or manipulation but had failed to speak up. A support group formed for educators processing their own experiences of institutional complicity and working to become better advocates for their students. But the most significant change was in the hundreds of families who reached out to share their own stories, parents who recognized the dynamics in their own homes, siblings who finally understood why they'd been treated differently, adults who had spent years believing they were the problem in their families. Adeline's blog became a resource center for family scapegoat recovery. She partnered with therapists and researchers to create educational materials about sibling abuse, institutional enabling, and the process of healing from family rejection. I started speaking at education conferences about the responsibility of teachers to advocate for all students, not just the ones who fit easily into our expectations. My presentation, "The Mathematics of Silence When Teachers Fail to Speak Truth," became one of the most requested sessions at professional development events. The hardest part was facing my current students with the knowledge of how badly I had failed a previous one. But that failure, and the public acknowledgement of it, made me a better teacher. I became hypervigilant about family dynamics, questioning narratives that seemed too neat, advocating fiercely for students who didn't have advocates at home. I never wanted to carry that kind of guilt again. A year after the truth came out, Adeline invited me to her book launch. Invisible Injuries Surviving Family Scapegoating was published by a major house and had already generated significant pre-publication buzz. The launch event was held at a bookstore in Austin, packed with supporters, family trauma survivors, and mental health professionals. I sat in the back, watching Adeline speak confidently about her work and her journey. She'd grown into the woman she was always meant to be: strong, articulate, unashamed of her truth. During the Q&A, a young woman raised her hand. "What would you say to the adults who stayed silent when they should have spoken up for you?" Adeline considered the question carefully. "I'd say that carrying guilt without action doesn't help anyone," she replied. "If you failed to protect a child in the past, you can't change that. But you can commit to doing better in the future. You can speak up now when you see injustice. You can use your regret as motivation to become the advocate you wish you had been." She looked directly at me as she spoke, and I felt both the weight of my failure and the possibility of redemption. After the event, we talked privately. "How are you doing with all this?" she asked. "I know the public attention has been difficult." It was typical of her to be concerned about my well-being when she was the one who had suffered. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to make it right," I told her honestly. "Teaching is different now. Better, I see students differently. Question my assumptions more. Speak up when I have concerns." "Good," she said simply. "That's what I hoped would happen." We talked about her book, her upcoming speaking engagements, her plans to start a nonprofit focused on family abuse education. She was building something meaningful from her pain, creating resources that might prevent other children from experiencing what she had. What about your parents? I asked. Have you had any contact with them since the library meeting? Her expression grew thoughtful. My mother has reached out a few times, wants to rebuild our relationship, but I think she's still looking for the daughter she lost, not seeing the woman I became. I'm not interested in being their redemption story. And Callista, we've exchanged a few emails. She's in intensive therapy, working on understanding why she did what she did. I appreciate her public confession, but I'm not ready for a relationship. Maybe someday, maybe not. And that's okay. She was right. Forgiveness couldn't be demanded or expected. Healing couldn't be rushed to fit other people's timelines. Adeline had earned the right to define her own path forward. 5 years have passed since Adeline Race walked back into my life through a blog post about invisible injuries. I'm 63 now, nearing the end of my teaching career, but I've never been more passionate about my work. Every semester brings new students, new opportunities to see clearly, new chances to speak up when it matters. Last month, I noticed concerning dynamics between two siblings in my third period class. The younger brother consistently deflected blame to his older sister for missing assignments, lost materials, disruptive behavior. The pattern was subtle but familiar, designed to make her look irresponsible while positioning himself as the victim of her negligence. This time, I spoke up immediately. I documented observations, sought input from other teachers, contacted the parents with specific concerns about the family dynamics I was witnessing. When the younger brother tried to blame his sister for a worksheet he'd deliberately torn up, I had evidence that told a different story. The family was resistant at first, defensive about my suggestions that they examine their assumptions about their children's behavior. But I persisted, sharing resources about sibling dynamics and family scapegoating. I offered Adeline's blog as reading material, framing it as educational rather than accusatory. Slowly, they began to see the patterns. The older sister, quiet, anxious, increasingly convinced she was the problem, started receiving the support she needed. The younger brother was held accountable for his choices while also getting help to understand why he felt the need to manipulate family dynamics. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was intervention. It was advocacy. It was the response Adeline should have received 15 years ago. I keep her book on my desk now, a reminder of the cost of silence and the power of speaking truth. Students sometimes ask about it, and I tell them it's written by a former student who taught me one of the most important lessons of my career, that being right doesn't matter if no one with power is brave enough to stand with you. Some of them understand immediately, the ones who carry that weight of being dismissed, doubted, or blamed for things beyond their control. I pay special attention to those students now, making sure they know at least one adult sees them clearly and believes their truth. Last week, I received a card from Emma, the young woman whose family dynamics I had intervened in. She's finishing her senior year now, headed to college on an academic scholarship, confident in her abilities and her worth. "Thank you for speaking up when it mattered," she wrote, "for seeing what was really happening and not staying silent. You changed my life." I keep that card next to Adeline's book, twin reminders of failure and redemption, of the weight of silence and the power of truth. Teaching mathematics has always been about showing students how to solve problems step by step, how to check their work, how to stand behind their solutions even when others question them. But the most important equation I've learned doesn't appear in any textbook: truth plus courage plus action equals justice. It's never too late to balance that equation. This is my confession, my apology, and my commitment. I failed Adeline Race when she was 13 years old, but I will not fail another student in silence. I will not let another child carry the weight of false accusations while I watch from the sidelines. I am the teacher. Their silence raised me to be flawed, regretful, but finally brave enough to speak the truth when it matters most. And I will keep speaking until the day I retire, ensuring that every student in my classroom knows they have at least one adult who will see them clearly, believe their truth, and stand with them when the mathematics of their life don't add up to what others expect. Sometimes the most important lessons happen outside the curriculum. Sometimes the greatest gift a teacher can give a student is simply this: I see you. I believe you. You are not alone. Epilogue 10 years later. I retired from teaching 3 years ago, but I still receive updates about Adeline's work through her newsletter and social media posts. Her nonprofit, Truth and Courage Foundation, has helped hundreds of families recognize and address scapegoating dynamics. She speaks regularly at conferences about family trauma and institutional advocacy. She never married, but she's built a chosen family of close friends who celebrate her birthday every year with elaborate cakes that feature her name prominently in the frosting. The photos she shares always make me smile. This is what love looks like when it's freely given rather than conditionally earned. Callista has largely stayed out of the public eye, focusing on her own healing and raising her daughter. According to the few updates Adeline has shared, she's become an advocate for children in her community, working with local schools to identify and address bullying situations. Her own experience with manipulation has given her unique insight into recognizing when children are being victimized either by siblings or by institutional indifference. Their parents live quietly in the same house where the twins grew up. They've never publicly acknowledged their role in what happened, but family sources suggest they've privately supported some of Adeline's foundation work through anonymous donations. It's not enough, and it's too late, but it's something. As for me, I spend my retirement volunteering with at-risk youth and mentoring new teachers. I tell my story often to educators who need to understand the cost of silence, to administrators who need to question their assumptions, to anyone who will listen about the responsibility we all have to speak truth when we witness injustice. The guilt never fully goes away. There are still nights when I lie awake thinking about the 13-year-old girl who looked to me for help and found only cowardice. But I've learned to channel that guilt into action, to honor Adeline's resilience by ensuring other children don't experience what she did. Last month, I received an invitation to speak at Lincoln Middle School's faculty retreat. The current principal, a young woman who wasn't even born when Adeline was expelled, wanted me to share my story with her staff as part of their training on advocacy and intervention. Standing in the same conference room where we had once discussed Adeline's behavioral problems, I looked at a new generation of educators and shared the most important lesson of my career. Students will remember the teacher who spoke up for them long after they've forgotten the quadratic formula. Be the teacher who sees clearly, speaks truthfully, and stands courageously. Be the teacher you would have wanted when you were 13 years old and struggling to understand why the world seemed stacked against you. Be the teacher Adeline Race needed and deserved to have. The mathematics of teaching isn't just about numbers and equations. It's about human value, about calculating the worth of every child who enters our classroom, about solving for justice even when the variables are complex and the solutions seem impossible. I spent 23 years teaching students how to show their work. It took me 15 additional years to learn how to show mine. But truth, I've discovered, is patient. It waits for us to find the courage to speak it. And when we finally do, it has the power to change everything, not just for the people we've wronged, but for everyone who comes after them. This is my work shown. This is my solution checked. This is my final answer. Submit it with the certainty that comes from learning the hardest lesson of all. Silence is never neutral. In the face of injustice, silence is always complicity. And our students, all of them deserve so much better than our complicity. They deserve our courage. Margaret Chin, retired mathematics teacher, Austin, Texas, 2024.